Hello and welcome to Pock and Rob. In this video, after having had this prep for a while and just not getting around to recording it, I'm going to do my video ranking the studio albums of John Lennon. Before I go in, I would remind you to subscribe if you haven't already done so, to click the thumbs up to like the video, the bell to receive notifications of future content, and share this video with someone else who might like it. So I'm going to rank the studio albums based on the John Lennon content. So you're probably aware that John's albums, there are 3 of them in particular where there's a lot of Yoko songs. I will mention them, but I'll be ranking it on the strength of the Lennon content. I'm also not including the experimental albums, you know, the unfinished music stuff. That is not for me really worth listening to. If you want to really rank them, put all 3 of them at the bottom. That'll save some time. So I'm looking at 8 albums, and at number 8 I have placed Sometime in New York City. Widely condemned as being a significant misstep of an album, highly politically charged, contains an opening track that cannot be mentioned on videos without videos being like struck or demonetized. Not that I make any money. Best track on it is probably New York City. It's a poor record. It's my number 8. And number 7, I have placed Rock and Roll. And I've got a feeling that my general disdain for covers albums comes from the Rock and Roll album being recorded. There's a reason. It was required as a result of a lawsuit. So there's a certain amount of, not quite, but almost contractual obligation involved. The performances are fine, but they're not his songs. And despite how difficult Lennon can be to listen to at times, I'd rather listen to Lennon songs. My number 7. Number 6, I have placed Milk and Honey. So this is it's a posthumous album. It's following the template of Double Fantasy, in that half and half between John and half with Yoko. The John songs on here include stuff like Nobody Told Me. And the opening track, I'm Stepping Out, and Borrowed Time. And they were unfinished demos that were done during Double Fantasy, fleshed out to be turned into this posthumous album when Yoko could face it. John's songs on here are pretty strong. It's my number 6. And number 5, I placed Walls and Bridges, the album from his Lost Weekend. And there's a lot to like on here. Number 9, Dream, I think is absolutely great. Surprise, Surprise, Sweet Bird of Paradox is lovely. I really like the opening track, Going Down on Love. I'm less enamoured with Whatever Gets You Through the Night, despite the fact that it was John's solo number 1 in the UK or in America throughout his entire career, and led to his final stage performance, which was as a result of Elton John playing on this record. They cut Whatever Gets You Through the Night, and John says, "That's your first number 1 single." And Lennon says, "No, it's not." And he said they made a bet. And the penalty of the bet was that if Elton John was correct, that John Lennon would appear with him on stage. And Elton was correct. And so we then ended up with him appearing at Madison Square Gardens and performing Whatever Gets You Through the Night, Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which was, at the time, I think, a number 1 hit for Elton John. So he'd had a hit with a Lennon song. And then shocked everybody by doing a song he introduced as being by an estranged fiancée of mine. And it was I Saw Her Standing There. And John had never been known to perform a Paul song before, which we now know with hindsight isn't true, because he actually performed 8 days a week, which was a Paul song. But it's one of the weaker tracks on the record, though. It's poppy, yeah, sure. But Walls and Bridges, I think it's due a kind of like a special edition, I think, because there's probably it would get a lot more love. Walls and Bridges, my number 5. Number 4, the predecessor to Walls and Bridges, and it's Mind Games. Now, Mind Games has been gaining a lot of appreciation recently because of the 50th anniversary deluxe super box edition that's come out. I remember listening to Mind Games back in about 1989, 1990, thinking it was a bit rubbish, not really enjoying it, thinking that at this point John had lost his ability to write a tune. It's only recently, listening to it again, I've realised that Mind Games is that bit of a lost classic. The title track is really rather good. Out of the Blue is lovely, although I will point out that it does follow the same chord progression sequence as Sexy Sadie, but then that's not a bad thing. And if anyone's going to rip off John Lennon, it should be John Lennon. I love Tight As. That's, I think, an absolutely banging song, second song on side 1. And then we've also got A Sumasan, I'm Sorry, and Bring On The Lucy, Free the People. And it's actually a really strong side 1 of a record. I think it tails off a bit on side 2. There's Less That I Care For. My number 4. And number 3, I have placed Imagine from 1971. Most people would put Imagine at number 1 or 2. I am not amongst them, and that's partly because I am one of the people who doesn't particularly care for the title track. It's not a bad song, but it's not the great anthem for peace and all of that everybody else puts it down as. I also don't like I Don't Want to Be a Soldier. I find the Oh Yoko song a bit near the knuckle. So many of John's albums contain a song that specifically name his wife. All the way back to some Beatles songs with Ballad of John and Yoko. And it strips them of their universality. And it can't be about anybody else then when he puts a name in. And a name that is not common. Anybody who uses the name Yoko, there is no question who you're talking about. If you use the name Linda, it could be anybody, to use another example of a Beatle wife. Or Patty. It could be anybody that you're talking about with that name. But Yoko's so specific that it strips any universality out of the song. However, the rest of the album is really good. And Jealous Guy, I find myself wishing that they really had worked more on Child of Nature and done it as a Beatles song, because it would have been enhanced. Crippled Inside, I think, is really good. How and Oh My Love are all really good songs. And then there's also How Do You Sleep? And that's probably the reason why it's at number 3, more than any of the other stuff I've mentioned. How Do You Sleep, I find an uncomfortable listen because, as I've already said, I'm a McCartney fanboy. Imagine, therefore, I place at number 3. And number 2, and this is on the strength of the Lennon material, Double Fantasy. Every single Lennon song on here I think is absolutely terrific. So we have got Just Like Starting Over and Clean Up Time and Beautiful Boy, which is absolutely lovely. Watching the Wheels, Woman, I'm Losing You, and Dear Yoko. The better of all of the Yoko referencing songs. I actually like Dear Yoko a lot. Because it's a fun track. And then we've also got, so on the strength of the Lennon songs, the 7 Lennon songs, it gets to number 2. What holds it there over Imagine is the fact that some of the Yoko material on here is actually really good. I like Kiss Kiss Kiss. I like Yes I'm Your Angel. I like Beautiful Boys, Darling Boys. So as a result, I find the whole of the Double Fantasy record a much more engaging listen than many other of the Lennon albums on here, because I actually like the Yoko songs. My number 2. Which leaves Plastic Ono Band as number 1. This would never have been here 4 or 5 years ago. And indeed, I still find it a very uncomfortable and difficult listen. I think the musicianship on here is borderline shoddy at times, and I'm sorry, Ringo and Klaus Vormann. That was probably what John was going for. But it's a really fine album. It's not a perfect record, and I certainly don't think it is the best of all of the Beatles solo albums. There's several McCartney albums I would put above this. There's several George albums I would put above this. But I do think Plastic Ono Band is his strongest record. It was just, when I first heard it, I don't think I was emotionally mature enough as a teenager to appreciate this record. So it kicks off with Mother, with that yelp, that howl of emotional pain. Hold On follows it up. I found out I enjoy Working Class Heroes, a great acoustic track. Isolation, I think, might be the best track on here. Side 2, I think, is a down step a little bit. Well is just noise. Remember, I've heard slagged off, but I actually find the fact that it suddenly ends with the firework thing. Remember the 5th of November, then it ends. I think that's really good fun. And then we've got a Love, absolutely beautiful. I could imagine that being Beatlified. Then we get God. And God is the reason why this album wouldn't be above several of the McCartney albums that are much more slight. I don't like it. Mainly because I disagree with virtually everything in it. There's an awful lot of I don't believes ins that I agree with, but the God is a concept by which we measure our pain. I thoroughly and fundamentally disagree with that. That was his statement of atheism, effectively. And I suppose, as well as that whole point at the very end of that I don't believe in section, he says, I don't believe in Beatles, and it stops. And then he goes, I just believe in me, Yoko and me. And I think, oh, great, we're back to referring to her again. No offence to Yoko, but I don't think I was emotionally mature enough to hold that, because I'd just become a Beatle fan. Plastic Ono Band, however, it is my favourite Lennon album. I placed it at number 1. So that concludes my ranking of the 8 studio albums of John Lennon. Please let me know in the comments below what you think of it. I'll be back soon with another video, but until then, I would remind you to subscribe, like, and hit the bell, and share the video, and thanks for watching.